Welcome to VLearn, Virtual Learning Network. This is session number 31 of subject India Earliest Times through the 8th Century AD, and the chapter is Growth of Tamil Language and Literature. Topics to be covered are Introduction, Early Evidences, Heroic Poems and Other Compositions. Introduction. Trade brings in immigrants and opens up avenues of interaction between local people and outsiders within the region. Interaction of cultures helps the growth of language and literature in a region. In this unit, you will be able to be made familiar with the growth of the Tamil language and literature. So when trade happens, it brings in immigrants and it opens up avenues of interaction between the local people as well as the outsiders, and this helps in the growth of language, literature, in the growth of attitude, values, and lot of new languages also come into the picture. Early evidences. Tamil had become a literary language, that is a full-blown language with its own system of writing at least by 3rd century BC, not earlier. The earliest evidence for the Tamil literary tradition, that is the tradition of writings in the language, comes from the Tamil Brahmi inscriptions in the Jain and Buddhist caves from the Tamil Brahmi hills. These inscriptions are in the form of labels of persons or bodies who donated the caverns. The major centers of these labeled inscriptions are Aruttapati, Karungalukuti, Kongara Pulyamkulam and Azakar Malai. Heroic poems. The Tamil heroic poems are called the Sangam literature since they were collected and classified by the Sangam, which was an academy of scholars. So the Tamil heroic poems, they are called the Sangam literature since they were collected and classified by the Sangam, which was an academy of scholars. Poems by themselves were not the product of the Sangam. The poems were much earlier than the Sangam. The history of the Sangam is clogged in legends. Tradition says that there were originally 3 Sangams, among which the works of the last one alone have survived. The time lag between the Sangam and the heroic poems shows that the name Sangam literature is a misnomer. So the history of the Sangam is clogged in legends, and tradition says that there were originally 3 Sangams, along with which the last one alone that has survived. Classification. Now we see the poems in the form of classified collections of specific poetic themes and conventions. Ettu Tugoi, or the 8 collections of poems, and Pattu Pattu, or the 10 ideals, are the 2 categories of anthologies that comprise the heroic poems. Naranai, Karuntukoi, Ayan Kuronu, Patiru Pattu, etc. are the few examples of anthologies grouped under Ito Kutoi, Mulla Pattu, Mudari Kanj, as well as Kurunji Pattu, etc. are the example of anthologies under Pattu Pattu. Techniques of composition. The heroic poems were composed on the principles of oral bardic literature. The features of oral compositions are strikingly similar all over the world. The use of stock phrases and expressions is the most important feature. Stock phrases or expressions are ready-made expressions of phrases current among the people of those times. So the heroic poems, they were composed on the principles of only oral bardic literature. And whenever the oral compositions are there, they are strikingly similar all over the world. And stock phrases or expressions, these were the ready-made expressions or phrases which were used amongst the people of those times. The poets knew the context of the ready-made expressions and where to use them and how in their poems. So the poets were well aware, they were familiar of the context of the ready-made expressions, how they were to use and where they were to use, they knew it. Problems of dating. The corpus of the Sangam literature cannot be precisely dated owing to a series of problems. In fact, several periods are represented in the poems of Sangam anthologies. One is a period of actual composition and oral transmission, which is fairly long and spread over a few centuries from about 2nd century BC to AD to 3rd century AD. Next is the period of the codification of the poems into anthologies, which is between 6th and 9th centuries. So basically there was a problem of the dates which were not available for the study of the poems of Sangam anthologies. And basically the problems were that they were not the corpus of the Sangam literature that cannot be dated, the date could not be found owing to the series of problems. One is a period of actual composition as well as the oral transmission, that is also fairly long and spread. And next is the codification of the poems into anthologies, that was also one of the problems which were faced. The poetics. Based on the Sangam literature, they developed a fairly evolved set of poetic conventions. Though the poetics, such as a little later, the rules and conventions of composition were part of the old Tamil bardic tradition. The two fundamental aspects of traditional Tamil poetics are the divisions of compositions into Akkam and Puram genres. Akkam is subdivided into 5 stages of love in relation to the 5 Tanais. Each Tanai is associated with a particular mood of love. Literary development. The Tamil literary tradition is independent of the classical Sanskritic literary tradition of India. It represents a parallel linguistic tradition in relation to Sanskrit. However, the development of the Tamil language and literature was never a process in isolation. Even the earliest stratum of the Tamil literature contains influences of Sanskrit. The heroic poems and other Sangam works contain traces of Aryan culture also. So, the Tamil literary tradition that is independent of the classical Sanskritic tradition, and it represents a parallel language or a parallel linguistic tradition that is in relation to Sanskrit. And the development of Tamil language and literature that was in relation to the way other traditions are also developing, that was never done in isolation, that was never done in isolation from any other literary development or language. So even the earliest stratum of the Tamil literature that contains influences of Sanskrit. So some Sanskrit words and some Sanskrit phrases were also used in the stratum of the Tamil literature. So the heroic poems and other Sangam works, they also contain traces of Aryan culture. So the Aryan culture was also traced here. Other compositions, the basic parts of Tolkayapiyam and some of the Kizanku texts constitute the other compositions here. These are called the other compositions because they do not belong to the bardic tradition of heroic poems, but they are not far removed from the literary background of the bardic tradition. The Poruludikaram part of Tolkapiyam that deals with the Akkam and Puram conventions of Old Tamil is close to the period of heroic poems. So, a lot of heroic poems were also written during that time. Similarly, the Tinai texts and works like Kalavasi are relatively earlier. So, these texts and works, Kalavasi as well as the Tinai texts, they are much earlier written. So these are some of the questions. You will be doing it yourself. That was all about the text and the heroic poems, the heroic texts which were written and how they were developed during that point of time, and the language of Tamil, the development of the Tamil literature, Tamil language, how it was developed. It was not studied or it was not in isolation of other literary traditions and culture. It was in relation to, it was integral to the other literary development and literary traditions which were studied. So Tamil as a language as well as a tradition, it grew hugely during that particular point of time. And these are some of the questions you'll be doing yourself. Question number 1, read the following statements and mark right or wrong. The Sangam literature belongs to a uniform period. The name Sangam literature is a misnomer. The heroic poems are composed using set phrases and expressions. The development of the Tamil language and literature was a process in isolation. I repeat, the Sangam literature belongs to a uniform period. The name Sangam literature is a misnomer. The heroic poems are composed using set phrases and expressions, and the development of the Tamil language and literature was a process in isolation. And question number 2, what do you know about the literary conventions of the Tamil bardic tradition? Answer in 10 lines. That's all. Thank you. Happy learning. We learning.